Welcome back to the 277th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including two that really talk about the shift that's happening in the West. The first one, a little bit more subtle. The second one, a huge example of a shift that is happening in the West. And then talking about, in our final article, the biggest donors for both sides of the political aisle, mainly Biden and Trump going into this election. Thought it was an interesting piece from USA Today. And then, of course, we went today with our Daily Delight. A story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump in to our daily debate. So, how do you feel about the draft? I think I've asked this one before, but it never hurts to bring it back up. And if I haven't asked it before, then guess what? You can answer it right here, right now. How do you feel about a draft? Should we have it? Should we not have it? Is it forced? Is that, let's be clear, the draft is forced, but is that okay that it's forced? Lots of different opinions out there, especially as we go into a more tumultuous, a little bit crazier, a little bit more unstable era. It's a question that my generation may have to deal with. The last generation that really had to deal with something like it was Vietnam. After, 2001, it was mainly volunteers that stepped up rather than being forced to do it through a draft process. So, we may have to actually have one in the future. Then again, that's what they kept saying during the first Gulf War. That's what they said during the 2001 era. So, at the end of the day, this conversation always comes back up, but there is supporting evidence this time, and that's the first article that demonstrates a shift of mentality in the West. And this one comes from Fox News. The headline reads, House passes defense bill automatically registering men 18 to 26 for the draft. So you can have lots of mixed opinions on this one. I would say that on its face, everybody should, or as far as I'm aware, except for maybe a few religious exemptions, everybody has to sign up for the draft. And when you're going in for your DMV, when you're getting your license, I believe you have to sign up for selective services. You get a letter in the mail saying you have to sign up for selective services. So this shouldn't be that big of a deal, right? Well, I think it's extremely interesting that now it's not, okay, hey, as a citizen of these United States, we expect you to do this. There's actually a law where if you try to not sign up or you dodge the draft, then we're going to come after you. Now they're just saying, you know what? We're not even, no, there's not even that false pretense of you can or cannot reject this. And like I said, there are certain cases where religious exemptions could be brought up, but even then, it would probably be more likely that you find a different place within the military in a lot of those cases, not necessarily actually completely stopping you from going to the military. But my point being that, well, now they're just saying, no, that pretense, that little false facade, no, we're just gonna sign everybody up. And I thought it was really interesting, especially the fact that this is coming from Fox News. Now, if you're a person who's in favor of the draft, then you're probably like, yeah, I mean, we should have this. It should automatically be a thing. And there are a few arguments that this article presents where it says it's cutting down on paperwork. It's making the process a little bit easier. Everybody's just automatically registered. The reason that I think this shows a sort of mentality shift is, one, why does this come now? So it's one of those questions of timing, okay? It doesn't necessarily, it's not that it's going to change the status quo that much, but it's like a insurance policy that you take out before you know that something big is coming, okay? It's saying, oh, okay, well, yeah, we see the unease on the world stage. We see how our enemies are responding to us. We see the situations that we're in. And we really want to shore up our system here. We want to make sure that everybody who didn't automatic or didn't send it back properly, we don't want to come after them. We understand that everybody gets busy, so we'll automatically sign you up. We'll be all nice about it. And as a person who is naturally skeptical of government, maybe that's me being a little bit paranoid. But also, I have felt as though that I have made this joke to my friends that, hey, if anything goes crazy and I get drafted, you may see a little bit of larger Alex. And then they make the joke to me, well, hey, it doesn't matter because the military will beat that largeness out of you and you'll be back down to fit in no time. I'm like, okay, yeah, fair enough point. Then hopefully I can score high enough on some of the aptitude tests. Maybe I'll be a really good fuel line mechanic. Maybe. Hey, let's hope. Let's pray. Not that I don't want to serve my country. I just don't think that I would be the most effective agent on the front lines. So the interesting question that underlies all of this is, are there more people like me in our generation that are hesitant, that aren't gung-ho about going and serving the nation? If our nation was attacked and they called me up, I think I would have a different perspective. There's no doubt about that. But I haven't been confronted with that, and a lot of our generation hasn't necessarily been confronted with that. We grew up after 9/11. We saw the repercussions of 9/11. And of course, we heard about what happened in our early childhood. We heard about the devastation, but we didn't see it firsthand. We only saw the repercussions. We only saw the security measures and the way the state operated after 9/11. So when asking us to take up for this country, we ask the question, are all the surveillance and all the monitoring that has been done in order to protect our security, is it actually worth it? Is the government, because they're directly involved in the economy nowadays, is the economy that they are helping direct, aka with the Fed, is it actually serving the people? 2008 leaves a material example. Recessions, whether you want to look at certain numbers or not, recessions during and a little bit after COVID, all these sort of questions float around, and our generation's pretty disaffected. So if you were to ask them whether they would willingly and just volunteer to go into service, they would probably say no. So when you see something like this, which is a policy that would force people to go up, whether or not they want to volunteer, and the government is putting in place a bill to really just shore up the foundation, make sure that people can't slip through the cracks, or just make sure that everybody is automatically signed up. If you're a skeptical person, you really have to step back and say, okay, are they doing this for the reasons that they say, which, hey, can cut down on some costs here or there, we just want to make sure everybody's in, or is it a preparatory thing? Are they looking towards the future? Are they looking at the escalating ties or escalating battles and the contentious relationship that we have with China and the butting heads in the region, making alliances, as we've talked about before, with Australia, with India, with Japan, with South Korea, and obviously Taiwan? Are we looking forward to that and saying, we may be going into this and we really want to shore it up beforehand? Or are we saying, no, actually, this is a process that we haven't had to use it, so it hasn't really been refined in a while. So, hey, let's update it. And if it happens to have good effects in the future, great. But at the end of the day, we're just really bringing it into the modern age. I don't know which one to truly believe, because my better instincts really, really want to believe in the goodness of people and wants to believe that there is a completely confrontational, non-necessary reason for this, which is honestly kind of worse, because if there's not a non-necessary reason for it, then why is government doing it in the first place? But if we're going to give up our rights for certain things, then they should probably, if we're going to give up our rights in order to give power to a government to use our money, our labor, and effectively enable us to live a more free life, that should be for things, when they're using that power, that should be for things that are only necessary. So if it's not, while I'm praying that it's not necessary and they're not looking to the future, like I just pointed out, and saying, oh, we're going to need this, if they are doing it and it's not necessary, like in that example I just provided, then the question then becomes, why are we doing it at all? Why are we giving you this power just to do something practically useless? So that's why I do kind of err on the side of the paranoia, which is, I think there are some high level, and this is not, I don't have any expertise in the area. I am talking out of my butt, but like I said, there are probably, in my mind, people who see the forthcoming issues that we're going to have with China, and I've talked about this extensively. I have made bets that they will try to invade Taiwan by the year 2026, and I also have one for 2028, but the main one's 2026. So I'm an avid believer that this is going to happen, and I've been making jokes about the draft for that war for quite some time. So I obviously am a little bit paranoid. I already got the whole idea that we are going to have to confront China on the world stage, and when you see things like this, maybe it's just feeding into that, or maybe there are some leaders who are actually in the Pentagon saying, hey, we really need to shore up this system just in case anything happens, or even worse than that, we need to shore up this system because we know something is coming, and they have some strategic analysis. Maybe it's not China either. Maybe it's the geopolitical situations around the world that we are involved in right now. Maybe they're making sure this gets cleared through before anything goes beyond the current place that it's at. So I've been ranting for a while. Let's actually get to what the article says. I'm sorry if you've been sitting here like, why is he telling us about his paranoia? If you listen to a lot of the podcasts, you can definitely feel that streak come out every once in a while, along with my cynical streak and also sometimes my hopeful streak. So, quote, the House of Representatives passed a measure on Friday automatically registering men aged 18 to 26 for selective services. It was part of the annual National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, and also, that's another thing here. The NDAA, we've talked about this before. It is an amalgamation of different pet projects by everybody who is in the House of Representatives and also in the Senate. And this is why we need to break some of these bills up into smaller pieces. And I understand why we do a large appropriations for national defense. But things like this, it kind of, if you're not paying attention, I mean, okay, if I didn't read this article, I would know nothing about it. If you didn't read this article, you know nothing about it. If you didn't happen upon this podcast one random day, you might not know about this because it is in the middle of a massive bill. And it's not looking at the overall budget, or it's not saying, okay, hey, what are the largest line items that are going to cost money? That's normally what people would look at in something that's a budget. And some things like this may get overlooked. They may get passed over. And yet this can have some really large effects. Imagine, and I don't know if this is the case or not, but imagine this, that people have objected because of their religious beliefs, and now they're just automatically put on the rolls, even though they have decided, no, I don't want to do it. Because there are certain processes where you do have to sign up for it, like I said, to get a license. Maybe people are purposely not driving with a license in order to not have to do selective services, which is illegal, fair enough, but they're still trying to make that choice to avoid this, and now it's basically all for naught. The government's just trying to end around in order to make sure that everybody that they can possibly pull up and force into service, that they will force into service. So, whether or not you agree with all those people that are how should I say? I don't want to say dodging, but because it's not at draft dodging yet. But the people that are deciding not to do this and taking on the risk, and they don't want to actually sign up for the draft at all. They don't want to even be on the rolls of people that could be called up. Whether or not you agree with it, that's how they're choosing to go about their life. And the government's just saying, no, you have no option in the matter. Now, I understand. Just as the government has an obligation to us, we do have some level of obligation to the government. Then again, we have given up a lot of our rights in order to give them the power to actually make sure that we get what we need and the protection that we need as citizens. So I would say the onus on sacrificing for your country, I'm not saying that everybody's 100% there and has meant that, but there are a lot of things that we give up just to be a part of the country and to give the government power over us and our communities. So to pretend as though that, oh, it's solely on us to serve in these sort of roles and that you are forced to in situations where we go to war. What if you don't support that war? What if you don't want your tax dollars to go to that war? What if that war isn't actually... All these questions are extremely, extremely important. And I really think it calls into question whether or not you truly do have such a obligation to serve your country in the military that they can force you to go up. That is always the important question about the draft, and you could make a very solid argument, and I wouldn't be opposed to hearing it, but I would always come back to, they would always say that, okay, well, the government does things for us. It protects us from outside nations, outside influence, and it doesn't always do that perfectly, but it attempts to. That is one of the main purposes of government, so you have to give back something. And I would return to exactly what I said before, which is at the end of the day, we are actually already giving up things in order to be part of government, okay? We're giving up rights. Some people would have a different view, which is no, government establishes rights. I say that we have rights before that, and you give up some of them in order to participate in a society and a government, so on and so forth. So we're already giving up things to establish the government, and the main thing that the government owes us is protection. Beyond that, it should be a voluntary process. And even then, some radical libertarians, anarchists, anarcho-capitalists would probably say, oh, you don't even need that much. But it's going to stoke this conversation again. I want to bring this one up because I'm not saying that we're going to have a draft. I don't necessarily believe 100% of my heart. I think that the odds are probably somewhere around 60-40. I think a lot of the people would revolt against something like this unless we are directly attacked if the draft was established, especially with some of the particular conflicts that we are funding or a part of right now. There would definitely be a large backlash if we got involved in any of those right now. So I don't necessarily see it coming at this moment in time, but I always think it's interesting to bring back up this conversation, especially with the comparisons that are being drawn to like 68 and the Vietnam War protests, and how there's certain segments of the population that are very active like they were then, and some cultural points are being asked again and being brought back up, and maybe this is another one that could possibly re-emerge into the psyche of the population. I don't know. It'd be very interesting to say the least, and that's why I'm saying it's kind of a mental shift for the West. It's shifting us from I don't want to say, I think it shows that our posture is a little bit more afraid, that we don't necessarily feel so assured in everything that we're doing right now. We want to really lock down the hatches, make sure everything is in order going forward. And that's the one that's, it's kind of like a soft shift. It doesn't necessarily show, it's not as emblematic of this large perspective shift, but it does show that there's really something going on in the minds of the leaders who are saying, okay, we need to make sure that our mechanisms for getting things in line, making sure that we're militarily prepared, are in order, meaning that it's possible that you can make an argument that the military leaders believe that we are not currently at full capacity to handle any such conflict that we're going into. Now, the second mental shift that I was talking about is much, much more obvious, and it doesn't necessarily have to deal with just the United States. That's why I said it was actually the West. And this article is coming from the New York Times. The headline reads, "The Greens are dead, long live the Greens." So for those of you who didn't know, the coalition that had been gaining some steam over the past few years were the Green parties throughout most of the European Union. They were pushing for a lot of climate change sort of agenda things, and they were having some success with the younger population. But as the dynamics started to shift, as economic inequality became much more apparent during the COVID era, with a few other factors besides that, obviously this is multifactorial. It's not just a simple thing, but basically the green-only agenda issues were not enough to keep them in power and keep them going. You probably heard about the really good elections for the more conservative parties in Italy, in France. Then you probably heard about Rishi Sunak calling a snap election in Britain and how that may not go so well for him. So it doesn't mean that all of Europe is turning away from the more conservative side, but we saw this about, I think it was a year and 2 months ago at this point, with the Netherlands farmers actually pushing back against some of these green policies because they were infringing upon their ability to farm and make a living and bring resources into their community and so on and so forth. So we've seen this kind of brewing and bubbling for a little bit, and it's finally come through the surface. We also saw it in Poland there for a while, where they were kind of flirting with a few more conservative parties. Obviously, the example that everybody on the left absolutely loves to bring up is Orban in Hungary, how he's evil, so on and so forth. So we've seen this festering, and now we've seen the snap. Okay, so or in this case, the snap back. Because if the snap was to the green policies at the beginning, the decentralization of their energy systems around coal, fossil fuels, things like that, this is the snap back. And it has some parts to do with the fact that the green policies aren't going far enough, or there are people who don't like the green policies because of how they've been implemented, and also a little bit of immigration mixed in there, which is a really important one during this election. It's honestly interesting how a lot of people in the United States seem to frame it, because a lot of the conservative commentators are saying, hey, this is really about inflation, and then also don't forget that it's about immigration. And I think they're framing it through a very American lens. I'm not saying it's not about immigration. There's no doubt about that. But they use it as a framing mechanism to serve their own storytelling about the United States. And I think it's a little bit more complicated than just that. Then again, I could also have a warped view because of reading this New York Times article on top of all the other commentary that I've heard. So let's actually give you a little bit of that same perspective. Maybe I can warp your mind a little bit to someplace else. If you're a person who's from the right, you may not have heard this perspective before. If you're someone from the left, you may have heard this one before, but they also sprinkle in a few things that are a little bit more conservative in nature. So if you're not going to actually hear it from me in this article, you can actually just go to the link in the description below the like and subscribe button down there, click on it, and you can go straight to this article, read it yourself, because I'm not going to be able to quote everything. Otherwise, the New York Times would come for my butt. So, quote, Europe's climate change-minded parties performed poorly in the European Union elections. Is the once ambitious European Green movement over, or could its electoral crash launch a rebirth? Which is most definitely an interesting question. So, here's the post-mortem section. Quote, centrist parties nibbled away at the Greens' support by incorporating much of their agenda into their own policies, yet the Greens' own identity failed to evolve sufficiently. That made the Greens seem too narrowly focused on an issue, the climate, that has slipped down in the ranks of voters' priorities. But there is also a broader trend at play that does not favor Europe's Greens. A backlash against climate change policies as part of a broader culture war has gained momentum. So let's pause here. I think it's interesting how they frame it. Oh yeah, they became a little too narrow-minded. They only had one issue, and that really went down on people's list of priorities. Why? Why did that go down on people's lists of priorities? Maybe because they're dealing with an energy crisis. And let's be clear, I'm not trying to attribute the energy crisis directly to the green policies. You could try to draw that line. I'm not doing that. What I am doing is saying, okay, why are they facing energy problems right now? Because Russia was a large supplier. They were building new pipelines, trying to get natural gas into Europe so they could have low emissions in their own country, still import it from other places. And therefore, the carbon footprint looks low in Germany while it's actually being exported to Russia because that's where they're using more fossil fuels to extract those fossil fuels. That's a separate thing. Whether you want to say that's weird policy just to make sure that your stats look good, fair enough. But the point being that they were very reliant on Russian natural gas, especially with the natural gas boom here in the United States too under Donald Trump, as well as a little bit more integration of certain oil markets, Venezuela kind of coming into OPEC a little bit more, Mexico coming into OPEC a little bit, all these different things. And now they're facing an energy crisis and they're facing high inflation. And guess what happens when you can't survive now? Okay, when you can't survive now, can you think about the future? And I'm not trying to be glib, and I'm trying to say, oh, it's the end of the world. No, their standard of living in Europe, in the United States, is higher than a lot of places around the world. But when you're still barely getting by, you have a nice place, don't get me wrong. You're not living in absolute poverty, but you're just barely getting by, being able to pay off your bills with the paycheck, barely being able to pay for your kids' school or your groceries or things like this. You do not have the time and or energy to go out and protest about climate or even worry about the climate movement unless you're a climate activist. And while it's nice to worry about the future, if you can't survive the present, then you can't think about the future. So maybe that's why. And let's be clear, I'm not attributing that to green policy solely, even though the author does go on to detail that a little bit. My point being that it's a luxury, that climate change, thinking about the future, these sort of policy proposals, these sort of issues are, while they're very central to some people, they are very central to nations that have already made it to the top. They are very central to nations that are well off, that can afford to think about the future of their nation and actually have to start thinking about the future of their nation because they've been around for long enough and the government is stable enough that they can actually look and say, okay, hey, if we exist in 100 years, we want this to be in place. We want to make sure that the sea levels aren't rising too much. That would disturb our economy. If you are looking at Sudan versus South Sudan, do you think right now either of those two nations that just had a pretty long civil war, that have ethnic populations that are a little bit mixed, even though they kind of resolved it a little bit with the breakup, but not really. There's possible strife within each of these countries. Do you really think that they're sitting there saying, we know that we're going to be here for the next 100 years, so let's start worrying about the climate problems that we're going to face? And no, they're thinking, okay, hey, we got to make sure our democracy is in place. We got to make sure these institutions are strong. We're going to alleviate the problems of everyday people, blah, 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 blah. You see where I'm coming from. So this is most definitely a issue that is for people who are well off enough to think about it. And as economic hard times and strife hits the nation, then it comes down to your bare essentials again. It comes down to the economy, it comes down to where you're getting your food from, how the farmers are able to live. I mean, right now they're probably getting crushed, so now they're pushing back against these policies that would, tighten the belt even more around them. You can see how all of these knock-on effects. It's very complex. I'm not trying to say it's one, like I said earlier, it's not just one factor, but when you're looking at the landscape and they're saying, oh, well, yeah, no, it's because they don't have a broader appeal on issues. That's true, but also their main issue, even if they had broad appeal on other issues, which is fair enough, even their main issue, because they're called the Greens, is not going to resonate as much when things are tough. So maybe I would say it's actually I was talking about how this talks about a change of mindset. I would say it even represents, it's more like a diagnosis. It points out, hey, we don't have time for the luxury policies right now. That's why the economy, whether or not we like it, that's why it's on a lot of people's minds in the United States election, because things ain't amazing. I'm not saying things are bad. A lot of people have experienced wage growth, not enough to outpace inflation. Some people have. Biden's team keeps putting out numbers how, well, hey, we got inflation to come down while we've been able to keep the unemployment rate from plummeting, which is cool, great. The inflation rate's still going up, and if you compare it to before the inflation even started, which wouldn't be fair anyway, you would have to do it on a yearly basis, it's still it's like 1.8 percentage points higher than they want it to actually be for our 2% standard inflation, and that's not including certain goods which have been removed from core CPI. There's lots of arguments about why that metric isn't effective anymore, but besides all of that, all of this strife, not only in the United States economically, how people are having a hard time, but looking at the strife in other places as well, you can see how the bare bones issues have come back to the center. It's going to be the moderate issues that actually get us through this election, and that's why certain issues just aren't going to resonate, and I think Europe is showing that, and their move from the Green Party dominance to a little bit more conservative figures, a little bit more national figures, a little bit more EU-centric figures, maybe that's another indication of the mental shift. And by maybe, I mean it definitely is. But, I'm just throwing my opinion out there. I could totally be wrong. And if you've made it this far, either you agree with me, or actually, I take that back. There are three. Either you agree with me, you think it's intriguing what I'm saying, but you don't know, or you're hate listening. If you're the first two, come on. Yeah, think about it. Throw some comments down there. Love to have a conversation. If you're the third person, throw some comments down there. I'll give you a thumbs up, and maybe we could have a conversation back and forth that might not be as friendly. And when I say that, I'm not saying that I'm going to be mad or you're going to be mad, but maybe a little bit more adversarial, and we'll push back a little bit more on each other. But I would be very interested to hear people's opinions on that mental shift, because now we're moving on from that section. We're going on to our last article, which is also about the election, which I kind of brought up there at the end. This article comes from USA Today. The headline reads, "Who are the largest Trump donors? Plus, look at the money behind Biden and RFK Jr." So, I'll be honest. This article spends a lot of time on Trump, which I thought was hilarious because, yeah, we want to know who some of the largest donors behind Trump are. I'm pretty sure that Biden has some mega donors too. I'm pretty sure that a lot of his money comes from PAC 2, and I'm being sarcastic. A lot of his money comes from PACs too. So why are we spending so much time on Trump? I mean, until the conviction, Biden was actually outraising Trump, and we're choosing to dismiss or at least move past the fact that he's getting lots of money from mega donors. I just think it's an interesting framing. But hey, whatever. They have their narratives about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, but they do mention it at least. So we'll go through one for each. Quote, Mellon, or let me actually back up here. Quote, banking heir Timothy Mellon continues to be the biggest single donor in the 2024 presidential campaign. Mellon donated around $15 million to a super PAC backing Donald Trump and RFK Jr. in April. Wait, hold on. A super PAC backing both of them? Interesting. Okay. Bringing this total contribution in this election cycle to over $50 million. He is supporting, so I believe what they're saying is he's actually donating $15 million to both of them, and he's putting money behind Kennedy and Trump. Obviously, not a big Biden boy here. So let's go to what they have to say about Mr. Biden. Oh, let me scroll. Let me scroll. Oh, wait. Hold on. Hold on. Did they not include a single donation for Mr. Biden? Let me check here. No, no, no. Well, Make America Great Again PAC, no. $1 million for pro-Israel Republican Jewish coalition for Trump, no. Kennedy's campaign is bolstered by a $10 million donation from his vice president pick, Nicole Shanahan. And then they're talking about Libertarian Party presidential nominations, or someone who donated in the past, Chris Ruffer. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, but here is a little tiny thing at the end. Quote, the CBS News and YouGov poll shows Biden and Trump are virtually tied among voters nationwide in the key swing states, and Biden at 49, Trump at 50% nationwide, and Biden at 50 and 40, and Trump at 49 in battleground states, both within the poll's margin of error. Okay, so I'm gonna give it one more chance. I'm gonna look back. Wait, let me see. No, there's no Biden there. Oh, wait. Outraising President Joe Biden's $51 million, though Biden still holds a substantial cash advantage. The figures will confirm when the joint fundraising committees submit their quarterly filings in mid-July. Doesn't the headline read, plus a look at money behind Biden and RFK Jr.? I don't see anywhere where it's mentioned that there is donating. Oh, wait, here it is. While main Biden backing super PACs support by LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman, billionaire James Simmons, George Soros, and Fred Eincher, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, sir, have raised over $120 million. Oh, so that's just slipped in there. That's the only reference that we have. They only talk about the overall numbers. They don't talk about individual numbers given by people. They just say, "Oh, well, that's the total raised." Ah, come on. I'm sorry. If you're trying for transparency, you're not doing it. You're only giving one side. If you just want to show where all of Biden's money is coming from, you're not doing it. If you want to show where all Trump's money is coming from, you want to call out these people, then yes. And what am I saying? What am I actually getting at here? USA Today is doing their thing. They're a little bit biased. They want to call out the people that are donating to Trump. I don't really care if you donate to Biden, Trump, RFK Jr., but if you're a media organization and you're going to call out the large sums of money that billionaires are giving to different presidential candidates, because that's how our election system works, you should probably do it for everybody. If you're going to disclose specific amounts for everybody, or at least one half of them, do it for everybody. So then you can play the same game, which is, they're possibly buying favors. They're going to want X, Y, and Z, so on and so forth. This person has interest in oil companies. This person has interest in different nonprofits that support X, Y, and Z. How about we do that for everybody, and we try to add transparency, not just for half of the aisle, okay? Come on, let's be honest here, but it's USA Today. They have their bend. I understand. I'm just not necessarily the most happy person with it, and that's really the only reason I had that article in there. I was being sarcastic. I knew there was only one mention from Joe Biden, and it's just stuff there. It's not even at the beginning. Some of them are, Trump's biggest donors, or this person, Trump. It's the first line. No, that stuff's at the end of a paragraph. It's just frustrating. It's like when different journalists bury I wouldn't say the most important tidbit, but a very important tidbit of the story at the very end, 23 paragraphs in or something like that. But hey, it is what it is. The state of our union. I'll call it out for you, and maybe in the future I will find a different article that details some of Biden's different donations and also Trump's donations, because we know that Trump has a lot of people who are very rich that are donating to his campaign, and we also know that he continues to say, hey, we're going to continue to lower your taxes. Is that because people in general really like that? Possibly. Is that because he has lots of donors who have lots of money who would also very much like that? Probably. I mean, both of those things can be true at once, but to pretend as though that Biden doesn't have people vying for their own interests on their side, because this is the narrative that's been being put out there. Oh, hey, Trump's meeting with all these billionaires saying, hey, we're going to bring down your taxes. You think that RFK Jr. isn't talking with certain people that give him money about certain things that are important to him, or important from the donor's perspective, or vice versa from Biden. I'm not saying that it's okay. I'm not saying that it's great. I'm not saying it should happen. But if we're going to expose it and we're going to call it a problem on one side, USA Today doesn't do that. That's fair enough. There's an overall narrative coming out about it. But USA Today doesn't do that. I'm not ascribing that to them, but there is a narrative out there. Then we do it on both sides. You know what? You know what capitalism? Okay, so you're going to be confused why I'm jumping to capitalism. Let me explain it this way. The way that capitalism works, the way that we are able to make the right decisions about where we want to put our money, how much we want to spend on something, what's the right price to pay, so on and so forth, how much value are we going to put on it, how much value are the people putting on it, all of these things require transparency of information. So the same thing needs to be true for our political system, okay? If we have a republic/democracy, we have to be able to know as much information as possible. And when you're a journalist and you're trying to keep all these people accountable, maybe you should do it to everybody. Maybe the fourth estate should actually be another check on government like it was intended to some degree. Then again, I understand that there's halves to the fourth estate. There's people who really call out the stuff on the liberal side. There are people that call out stuff on the conservative side. Great. I'm happy that we can do that. But it is just extremely frustrating that we can't just have a middle ground here, especially on something as simple as this. This is not a worldview issue. This is not a worldview issue, okay? Because if you believe that money going from donors to the person is swaying their opinion and not good for the system, and you're going to put out information that is obviously to that effect, trying to call out these people for what they do, what issues they care about, where they've donated in the past, then why not do it for both sides? I could see an argument where you say, no, I agree with what they're actually donating for, so I don't want to call it out. Fair enough, but then don't make your argument about, don't make your article appear as though it is a truth-telling statement trying to make sure that everybody knows who the big donors are, and then have it coincide very conveniently. And yes, this is my paranoid side, but very conveniently, it comes on the tails of the whole, Biden, Trump is meeting with these donors, and now they want this, so he's giving them this. That's always been a narrative. It always should be a narrative, because Trump was at the very beginning, when he was running in 2016, he was saying, hey, I don't need the outside money. He got a lot of outside money. There's no doubt about that. But he said, hey, I don't need the outside money. That has definitely shifted, which means I'm not saying that he's bought off. I'm not saying any politician is bought off. Some people would say that it's legalized buying off. I'm not saying that. But some people, oh, wow, I sound like Trump. Oh, some people would say, no, but I definitely have heard that narrative multiple times, especially after Citizen United. I'm not trying to make an accusation like that, because that is very bold. But the point I'm getting at here is every single person takes money. So let's call them all out if you think it's an issue. Don't try to pretend that it's an issue for one side but not the other. That's all I'm getting at. This story follows very, very neatly and very conveniently behind the entire narrative that is just that. And I'm not saying that they're in here saying, oh, yes, we're pretending to be, or we're trying to be the most objective journalists ever. No, obviously they have their bend, and they're not trying to claim that they are. I just always think it's interesting. I want to call it out, and maybe USA Today could do it a little bit more even-handedly. Maybe I'm asking too much, but that's just me. So that was a really long rant. That was basically me saying the same thing over and over and over again, just in different ways. I'm so sorry if you made it through that. Let's jump into our daily delight. This one comes from STL Today. I believe that's St. Louis Today, but I could be wrong. It's actually, I take that back. It comes from stltoday.com. It comes, though, through the Associated Press. Quote, this was adorable. Young bear spotted relaxing on a hammock in a Vermont yard. And I actually, when I read this, I actually plugged it into an image generator because I wanted to create like a pop art version. It was actually very cool. The photos and videos they have in here as well. This guy, he's just chilling, man. He's just trying to relax. He's in a little Vermont suburb, a little bit of the backyard vibes. And he's like, hey guys, no, I'm good. Just relax. I'm just chilling. I'm not trying to get in your stuff. So if you want to see any of the cute photos or videos associated with that one, want to read that article or read any of today's articles, there'll be the links in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the links to the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcast, as well as Podvine, and the Twitter handle @YourDailyFlip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. A little bit more free form, a little bit more all over the place. Sometimes I am just thinking thoughts out for the first time. Then again, I do that on the podcast too. But sometimes they're just really random. They're not as structured with the articles and concepts that we're trying to weave together, especially now where I'm trying to build more of a narrative versus just having article. I'm trying to have it synthesize a little bit and tell a larger story through 2 articles, and normally the third one's like foreign policy or maybe something like this today where it's not necessarily involved, but it's still important, at least in my mind. So with all that said, thank you for joining me for this episode of the Daily Flip podcast. And all of that out of the way, there's only one more thing to don't die.